The sun had barely climbed above the horizon, when the sound of gentle waves brushed against the wooden stilts of the tiny homes scattered along the coast of Cavite, a small fishing town in the Philippines. The smell of salt, fried fish and morning coffee blended in the humid air as life stirred along the shoreline. Among the early risers was 12-year-old Marco Reyes, barefoot, thin, and wearing a faded shirt with the word "Dreamer" printed across the chest. He carried a woven basket filled with small tilapia and bangus, following closely behind his mother, Aling Rosa, who called out cheerfully to the townsfolk, "Fresh fish! Fresh catch of the day!" Their voices mingled with the morning chatter, but Marco's was softer, almost melodic, like a song waiting to happen. The locals smiled when they saw him. Everyone in the market knew Marco, not just because of his kindness or his hard work, but because of his voice. When the day's work was done and the sun began to sink, Marco would take his old, cracked guitar down to the pier, where he would sit on the edge, legs dangling above the water. That was his stage, and the ocean was his audience. His voice carried across the bay, warm, soulful, and astonishingly mature for a boy his age. He didn't sing pop songs or local hits. Instead, he sang the music his father used to love, the golden voice of Elvis Presley. That evening, like many before, the town gathered near the water to listen. "Sing the one your papa loved," an old fisherman shouted. Marco smiled. He brushed his hair aside, tightened the loose string of his guitar, and began softly. "Wise men say only fools rush in." The notes were simple, but the emotion in his voice painted the air with nostalgia. The old men tapped their feet, mothers swayed with their babies, even the sea seemed to hush to listen, and behind every word, behind every tender vibrato, was the memory of his father, a fisherman who used to sing Elvis songs on long nights at sea, before a storm took him away 2 years ago. When Marco finished the song, silence lingered before applause erupted. He grinned shyly, bowing as if he were on a grand stage. "You sound more like Elvis every day," said one of the vendors, laughing. Marco chuckled, but his eyes softened too. After the crowd dispersed, Marco sat alone, staring at the horizon where the sun met the sea. He strummed the guitar again, quietly whispering, "One day I'll sing where everyone can hear me, Papa. I'll make you proud." The guitar wasn't much, a gift from his father, once bright and varnished, now dulled and scratched from years of use. A crack ran down its neck, and one of the tuning pegs was missing, replaced with a piece of wire Marco found at the junkyard. Yet, when he played it sounded whole, because music for him wasn't about perfection, it was about memory. That night something unexpected happened. As Marco sang under the moonlight, a couple of foreign tourists walking by the shore stopped to listen. They were from Ireland. Honeymooners traveling through Southeast Asia. They were enchanted by the boy's voice. The woman, named Claire, whispered, "He sounds like Elvis himself." She took out her phone and began recording. Marco didn't notice, his eyes were closed, lost in the song. He sang, "Can't Help Falling in Love," as though his heart were the microphone. The wind carried his voice, the waves echoed it, and by the time he finished, the woman's eyes glistened. She approached him. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Marco blinked, shy and unsure of what to say. "Thank you, ma'am," she asked. "Where did you learn to sing?" Marco looked down at his guitar. "From my papa. He loved Elvis." The man smiled. "Your father would be proud, lad." They handed Marco a small tip, but he shook his head politely. "It's okay, sir. You already listened." The couple looked at each other, surprised by his humility. The woman pressed her hand to her heart. "You have a gift, sweetheart. The world needs to hear it." Later that night, back in their hotel room, Claire uploaded the video to her social media with the caption, "Ma met a Filipino boy singing Elvis by the sea. His voice touched our hearts." She thought nothing more of it. But by morning, the video had exploded, shared thousands of times, spreading across continents like a spark in the wind. The boy's angelic voice, raw and timeless, reached Ireland, the UK, and eventually, the producers of Ireland's Got Talent. Back in Cavite, Marco was completely unaware. He was busy cleaning fish with his mother when a local teenager ran toward them, shouting, "Marco, you're famous! You're on the internet!" Marco frowned, confused. The internet. The boy showed him his phone, the video of Marco singing by the ocean. It had over 1.2 million views and hundreds of comments from around the world. "Who is this angelic voice? Send this boy to Ireland's Got Talent." Even Elvis would cry. Marco's mouth fell open. His mother gasped, covering her lips. "Oh my son." A week later, a letter arrived from Dublin. Official, stamped and real. "We would like to formally invite Marco Reyes to audition for the next season of Ireland's Got Talent." Rosa clutched the paper, trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. "Marco, your papa always said your voice would take you places." Marco stared at the letter, unable to speak. A storm of disbelief and joy swirled in his chest. He whispered, "Ireland, that's so far." His mother smiled through her tears. "Far, but maybe not too far for dreams." That night, Marco sat on the same pier where everything began. The sky shimmered with stars. He held the letter close and whispered, We did it, Papa, they want to hear me. The ocean breeze swept around him, and for a fleeting moment, he could almost hear his father's voice, soft, deep and proud, singing along, "If I can dream of a better land." Marco smiled through tears. The boy with the voice of yesterday was about to step into tomorrow. The Manila airport was a blur of noise and motion. Luggage wheels rolling across tiles, flight announcements echoing over loudspeakers, families hugging, crying, laughing. In the middle of that swirl stood Marco Reyes, clutching his small guitar case with both hands. The wooden handle was wrapped in tape, but to him, it was more precious than gold. Beside him, his mother Aling Rosa held their travel documents tightly, her fingers trembling. It was the first time either of them had ever left the Philippines. The invitation letter from Ireland's Got Talent still felt like a dream. A fragile one that could vanish any moment. The Irish embassy had helped arrange their travel papers after seeing the viral video. Sponsors had covered their airfare. For two simple souls from a small fishing town, this felt like a miracle wrapped in airplane tickets. As they passed through security, Marco looked around in awe. He had never seen so many lights, screens, and people speaking different languages. "Mama," he whispered, "everyone looks so tall." Rosa chuckled softly, adjusting his hoodie. "You'll be taller one day, maybe even taller than them." But when she turned away, her smile faded. She was worried, not about the journey itself, but about what waited ahead. They had no money for fancy hotels or food. Their English was broken. What if this dream only led to disappointment? Still, when she looked down at her son's eyes, bright, hopeful, innocent, she told herself if God opened this door, he'll make a way. On the plane, Marco pressed his face to the window as the engines roared. The island below grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared beneath clouds. "Mama," he whispered, "we're flying!" Papa always wanted to fly. Rosa smiled faintly. "Yes, maybe he's flying with us now." For most of the flight Marco practiced softly under his breath, humming, "If I Can Dream," over and over. The passengers nearby smiled, some recording him discreetly. Even in whispers, his voice carried warmth. An elderly Irish lady sitting beside him leaned closer. "You've got a voice like sunshine, lad. What brings you to Ireland?" Marco blushed. I'm going to sing." Her eyes twinkled. "Sing, are you? Well then, you'll melt all our cold Irish hearts." When they landed in Dublin, the cold air hit them like a wall. Marco shivered, unused to the chill that cut through his thin jacket. The sky was grey and drizzle misted the air. He zipped up quickly, laughing. "Mama! It's like the fridge." Rosa laughed too, though her hands were freezing. "Inaku, we need to buy thicker clothes." But they didn't have much money. The producers of the show had promised to reimburse their stay later, but for now, they had to survive with what little cash they brought from home. As they stood by the taxi stand, a driver approached, a burly Irishman with kind eyes. "You the folks from the Philippines?" he asked in a thick accent. Rosa nodded shyly. "Yes sir." "Going to?" he interrupted, grinning. "Ireland's Got Talent, right?" "I saw the video of the Elvis kid!" "That's you, isn't it, lad?" Marco's mouth dropped open. "You saw it?" "Course I did!" "Whole country's talking about ya." When they reached the hotel, Rosa pulled out some pesos to convert and pay. The driver waved it away. No, keep your money, it's on me. My daughter sings too, just don't have the courage you got, young man." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "God bless you sir." "Salamat." The man smiled. "You'll do grand, lad. Just sing from the heart." Their hotel was modest but warm. The manager, a cheerful woman named Fiona, recognized them immediately. "You must be Marco. Welcome, love. You've got half of Dublin rooting for you already." She leaned down and whispered. "Don't tell the other guests. But I gave you the best room we've got." When they opened the door, Marco gasped. There was a soft bed, a glowing heater, and a window that overlooked the city lights. To a boy who had grown up in a bamboo hut by the sea, it looked like heaven. That night, Marco couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The lights of Dublin sparkled like scattered stars, and far away, church bells chimed midnight. He touched the glass and whispered, "Papa, can you see this?" Rosa stirred from the bed, half asleep. "You should rest, Anak. You have a big day tomorrow." "I know, Mama," he said softly. "But I'm scared." "Off what?" He hesitated. "What if they don't like me? What if I forget the words?" Rosa got up and walked over, wrapping her arms around him. "Listen, Marco, the people might hear your song, but your papa, he'll feel it. That's all that matters. Just sing to him." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I will." The next morning, Marco stood in front of the hotel mirror, dressed in a white shirt, black pants, and a small leather jacket they'd borrowed from a kind Filipino family living in Dublin. He looked at himself and tried to imagine standing in front of Simon Cowell. His heart raced. "Okay," he whispered to his reflection, clutching the guitar, "don't be scared. Just sing from your heart, for Papa." He took a deep breath and began humming, "If I Can Dream." His voice was quiet but steady, filling the tiny room with something warm and timeless. Rosa watched from the bed, her hands clasped. For a moment she closed her eyes and imagined her late husband sitting beside their boy, strumming along like he used to. She could almost hear his voice whisper, "Our son's ready, Rosa. Let him fly." Later as they stepped outside, a gentle snow began to fall, Marco's first snow ever. He held out his hand and laughed as flakes landed on his palm. "It's like tiny stars," he said. Rosa smiled. "Maybe your papa sent them." They walked hand in hand toward the waiting car that would take them to the studio. The world seemed vast, uncertain, and cold. But in that moment, surrounded by snow and the hum of city life, it felt like they were walking in the middle of a miracle. In the back seat, Marco stared out the window at the Irish countryside as it blurred past. For a moment, he saw his reflection and thought about all the people who had helped them. The cab driver, the hotel manager, the strangers who shared their story online. He realized something then. Kindness was the language of the world. It didn't matter where you were born or what you had. There were people everywhere who believed, who cared, who lifted others up. As they neared the TV studio, Marco whispered a silent prayer. "Lord, thank you for everyone who helped us get here. Please help me sing, not just for Papa, but for them too." Rosa squeezed his hand. "We're here in Ac." Marco took a deep breath. The gates of the studio came into view. Bright lights, crowds, cameras. His dream was no longer a wish on the ocean wind, it was real. And tomorrow, the world would hear the boy who carried his father's song across the sea. The vast stage of Ireland's Got Talent gleamed under hundreds of dazzling lights. The theater was packed, thousands of people murmuring with anticipation. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of nerves, hope and dreams about to be tested. Backstage, Marco Reyes sat quietly on a folding chair, clutching his small guitar. Around him, performers stretched, rehearsed, and fidgeted nervously. A magician practiced his card tricks, a dance troupe whispered in Irish. But Marco was silent, staring down at the scuffed floor, his heart beating so hard he could hear it. His mother, Rosa, knelt beside him, smoothing his hair. "Are you okay, Anak?" He nodded, though his voice trembled. "My hands are shaking, Mama." "That's good." She smiled gently. "It means your heart is awake." From behind the curtain, they could hear the audience cheering for another act. Then, a voice called out, "Next performer." Marco Reyes from the Philippines. Rosa squeezed his shoulder. "You can do this, my son. Sing like you're at the pier. Just you, the sea and your papa." Marco took a deep breath, stepped onto the stage, and felt a rush of lights hit his face. The sudden brightness made him blink. Before him stretched a sea of faces, an enormous crowd rows upon rows, and at the very front, the judges' panel: Amanda Holden, Lewis Walsh, and, right in the middle, Simon Cowell. Simon leaned back in his chair, scanning the boy curiously. He had seen hundreds of auditions, maybe thousands. Child singers were nothing new. But there was something about this kid, barefoot, holding a battered guitar, wearing a too big leather jacket, that made him tilt his head. The host, standing at the side, smiled kindly.
"Hello there, what's your name, young man?"
Marco swallowed hard. "My name is Marco Reyes. And where are you from?" "From the Philippines, sir." A few Filipino flags waved in the audience. Marco smiled nervously, gripping the microphone. "What will you be performing for us today?" the host asked. Marco hesitated, then said softly, "A song by Elvis Presley, If I Can Dream." There was a collective murmur. Simon raised an eyebrow. "Elvis?" "Yes, sir," Marco replied, voice trembling. "My father used to sing it, he taught me." Simon nodded slowly, his usual skeptical look softened just a bit. "All right, Marco, let's hear it." The lights dimmed, the audience fell silent. For a brief, haunting moment, there was nothing but the sound of Marco's small breath echoing through the microphone. Then, he strummed the first chord on his guitar, and sang. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. The voice that came out was not what anyone expected. It wasn't childish or timid. It was deep, soulful, filled with longing and old soul warmth that seemed to come from another time. Every word trembled with emotion, like he wasn't just singing about a dream, he was living it. The first row of the audience gasped. A woman clasped her chest. Amanda Holden whispered, "Oh my God." Marco closed his eyes, his voice swelling with power. His accent gave the words a tenderness that made them new again. It wasn't an imitation of Elvis. It was Marco's soul, wrapped in the echo of his father's love. "If I can dream of a better land, where all my brothers walk hand in hand." By the second verse, people were already standing. Cameras zoomed in on Simon Cowell's face, the man known for his stoicism, his sharp criticism. His expression had changed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on the boy. As Marco reached the chorus, his voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of emotion. He thought of his father, of nights by the sea, of his mother's tired smile, of the people who helped them reach this stage. His voice lifted higher. "We're lost in a cloud, with too much rain." His mother watched from the wings, hands clasped in prayer. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Sing, Anak, sing for him. We're trapped in a world that's troubled with pain." Simon's eyes glistened. He bit his lip, blinking rapidly. The other judges exchanged glances. They'd never seen him react like this. But as long as a man has the strength to dream, he can redeem his soul and fly. By the time Marco sang the final note, the theater was utterly still. Then, as if breaking from a trance, the crowd erupted. A thunderous standing ovation swept the room. People cheered, some cried openly. Even the crew backstage wiped their eyes. Marco lowered his guitar slowly, stunned. He looked out at the crowd, lost for words. Amanda Holden stood first. Marco, that was heavenly. You sang with your whole heart. I felt your love, your loss, your hope. You made all of us believe again. Lewis Walsh nodded, smiling proudly. It's rare, lad, very rare, to hear a voice that feels like a prayer. You've just done that. Then came Simon. He sat quietly for a moment, head bowed, composing himself. When he looked up, his eyes were red. The audience went silent. Marco, he began slowly, his voice low and sincere. I've heard a lot of singers in my life, but what you just did, that wasn't a song. That was a message. Marco blinked, trembling. A message, sir. Simon nodded. Yes, you reminded us that music isn't about fame or perfection, it's about connection. And you, young man, connected with every soul in this room. There was a beat of silence. Then Simon reached out, and slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The entire theater exploded in cheers. Golden confetti rained down like sunlight as Marco fell to his knees, overwhelmed. His mother ran onto the stage, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, whispering, I'm so proud of you, my son. So proud. Simon stood, wiping his tears discreetly, then said softly into his mic, your father would be proud too. Marco sobbed into his mother's shoulder, whispering, he heard me, mama. I know he did. The lights shimmered, the crowd chanted his name. Marco! Marco! And through the golden rain, a small boy from a fishing village in the Philippines stood bathed in light, clutching his broken guitar, crying and smiling at once. In that moment, the dream that began on a wooden pier had crossed oceans, melted hearts and touched the world. The golden confetti was still falling like rain, swirling through the bright theater lights as the crowd roared. It clung to Marco's hair, his face, his small hands gripping the guitar. He looked around in disbelief, laughter and tears tangled together in his trembling smile. For a moment, the world felt weightless, like all his father's dreams had been caught in that glittering shower, descending to bless him. His mother Rosa clutched him tightly onstage, whispering between sobs, You did it, Anak, you did it! Oh, your papa is smiling in heaven. Marco could barely breathe. Mama, I heard him. When I sang, I felt like he was right there beside me. The audience wouldn't stop cheering. People waved Filipino flags, some cried openly. A few shouted, We love you, Marco! And, sing again! Cameras flashed. Was chaos, the beautiful kind. Back at the judges' table, Simon Cowell sat quietly amid the noise. His usual sharp posture had softened. His eyes glistened. He looked down at the button he had pressed, the golden buzzer still glowing faintly, the symbol of his rarest approval. For years, he had seen performers chase fame, but this was different. He leaned toward Amanda Holden and whispered, voice thick with emotion, that boy didn't come here to win. He came here to heal. Amanda nodded, dabbing at her eyes. He just reminded all of us why we fell in love with music in the first place. Lewis Walsh, smiling proudly, added, that's what the world needs right now. Something pure, something honest. When the noise finally subsided, Simon rose slowly from his chair, microphone in hand. The crowd quieted as he walked toward the edge of the stage. His face was unreadable for a moment, then softened into something almost paternal. Marco, he said, his voice breaking slightly, I don't often get emotional. You can ask anyone here. But I want you to know something. Marco looked up, eyes wide. Simon continued, when I was a boy my mother used to play Elvis in our home. Hearing you tonight, hearing that song again, it felt like I was hearing her voice, her warmth. You brought her back for a few minutes. The theater went still. Even the production crew backstage froze. Simon took a breath and said softly, you didn't just sing that song. You brought love back into this room. And for that, thank you. A collective awe rippled through the audience. Some stood again, clapping slowly, reverently, not like fans applauding a star, but like hearts acknowledging another heart. Marco, overwhelmed, stepped closer to the mic, his voice quivered. Thank you, sir. I just wanted my papa to hear me from heaven. Maybe music can reach that far. Simon nodded, eyes glistening again. It can, Marco. I think it just did. The audience broke into applause once more, softer this time, not thunderous but full of soul. As Marco and Rosa exited the stage, still crying and laughing, the camera caught Simon turning slightly away, wiping his eyes discreetly. But it was too late. The whole world would soon see Simon Cowell cry. Backstage the atmosphere was electric. Crew members clapped, producers hugged Rosa, and other contestants smiled in admiration. Marco stood there in the middle of it all, still dazed, clutching his guitar as if afraid he might wake up from this dream. A stagehand handed him a towel to wipe off the gold dust. You okay, kid? He asked kindly. Marco nodded. Yes sir, just really happy. The man smiled. You should be. That was the best audition I've seen in years. Rosa hugged her son again, whispering through tears, do you see what happens when you sing with love, Marco? The world listens. Then, a producer approached the Irish woman with bright eyes and a headset. Marco, Simon wants to see you before you leave. Marco froze. Me, really? She nodded. He said it's important. Rosa squeezed his shoulder gently. Go and act. He just wants to thank you. Marco hesitated, then nodded. He followed the producer down a hallway lined with stage lights and posters. His small footsteps echoed softly. When they reached Simon's private dressing room, the door was slightly open. Inside, Simon sat on a couch, still wearing his crisp white shirt now unbuttoned at the collar. He looked up and smiled when he saw the boy. Hey there, superstar, Simon said softly. Come in. Marco stepped inside nervously, bowing slightly like he'd seen people do on TV. Hello sir. I wanted to thank you for the golden buzzer. Simon gestured for him to sit beside him. You don't have to thank me, Marco. You earned it. For a moment, they sat in silence. Then Simon asked, that song, Why If I Can Dream? Out of all Elvis songs, why that one? Marco looked down at his guitar, his fingers tracing the wood grain. 'Cause my papa used to sing it when he was sad. He'd say it reminded him that even poor people can dream. When he died, I promised I'd sing it for him, one last time, somewhere big enough that he could hear me. Simon's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, swallowing hard. He whispered. Marco blinked. You think so? Simon turned back to him, smiling faintly. I know so. Because people like your father never really leave. They stay in the songs we sing and the love we give. Marco nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. My mama says the same thing. Simon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, a simple star-shaped badge. This is something we give to very few performers, he said, handing it to Marco. It's not about winning or losing, it's about reminding you that what you do can change people. And tonight you changed me. Marco held the pin with both hands, speechless. Thank you sir. Simon smiled warmly. Promise me something, Marco. Never stop singing like that. Never sing for applause. Sing for love, for hope, for your papa. That's the kind of voice that can change the world. I promise. Marco said softly. As the boy left, Simon watched him go, his expression distant but peaceful, as if something inside him had been mended. Amanda Holden knocked on the door, then peeking in. Are you alright, Simon? She teased gently. You cried on camera. Simon chuckled, wiping his eyes again. First time in years. That kid, he reminded me what this show is supposed to be about. Amanda smiled knowingly. Simon shook his head. No, about finding heart. Later that night, long after the cameras had stopped rolling, Marco and Rosa returned to their hotel room. They were too excited to sleep. Rosa opened the curtains and outside Dublin glowed under the night sky. Marco stood by the window, the golden confetti still stuck to his jacket. He whispered, Mama, do you think Papa really heard me? Rosa placed her hand over his heart. Yes, Anak, because when you sang I felt him too. Marco smiled, pressing his palm against the cold glass. The stars shimmered faintly, and he whispered, Thank you, Papa, we did it. Behind him, his mother hummed softly, the same Elvis tune his father once sang. For the first time in years, there was no sadness in her voice, only peace. And somewhere, far beyond the clouds, a father smiled down at the little boy who carried his dream across the world. A boy who reminded millions that even in pain, music could heal, and even the hardest hearts could cry again. The air inside the Grand Theater was electric. That soft hum of anticipation before something unforgettable happens. The judges' table glowed beneath the stage lights, the crowd still whispering about what they had just witnessed. Marco stood center stage, tears drying on his cheeks, his hands still trembling around his worn guitar. He had finished his song, but the silence that followed was the loudest sound he'd ever heard. Then, from the far left of the judges' table, Simon Cowell leaned forward, his usually stoic face softened. His eyes were glassy, not with judgment, but with emotion. He pressed his lips together, struggling for words. Then he did something he rarely did. He stood up. The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed in. Simon's voice broke slightly as he said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard thousands of singers. But what you just did, Marco, it wasn't just singing. It was feeling. It was truth. The audience erupted in applause. Marco blinked rapidly, his chest rising and falling. He whispered, Thank you, sir. Though his voice was almost lost in the roar of the crowd, Simon turned toward the audience and raised his hand, asking for quiet. I didn't understand a single word of Tagalog when you spoke before, but when you sang I understood everything. He took a deep breath. That was love, that was loss, that was hope. He looked down the table. Amanda was already crying openly. Lewis Walsh wiped his eyes. Even Alicia Dixon clutched her heart, shaking her head in disbelief. And then, Simon looked back at Marco. His hand hovered above the golden button. The audience realized what was about to happen. A wave of excitement surged through the crowd like a storm.
DOIT Simon!
Someone shouted from the stands. Another voice cried. ISI. Simon smiled softly. Marco, rise, you've reminded us all what music is meant to be. He pressed the golden buzzer. In an instant, gold confetti exploded from the ceiling, swirling like a rain of stars. The lights shimmered, the crowd screamed, and Marco fell to his knees in disbelief. The golden dust clung to his hair and skin as he looked up, tears streaming down his face. His mother, standing backstage, covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably. The stage manager let her through, and she ran to her son. Marco turned just as she reached him, and they embraced tightly beneath the falling gold. Mama, he whispered through tears, we did it. She cupped his face, smiling through her sobs. No, Anak, you did it. Your papa is watching from heaven. Simon wiped his own eyes. I don't cry easily, he admitted, voice breaking into a small laugh. But I think we all just witnessed something divine tonight. The audience rose to their feet, not for a performance, but for a moment of humanity. The standing ovation went on for minutes. Marco and his mother held hands, bowing deeply again and again, overwhelmed. That night Marco couldn't sleep. Back in his small hotel room overlooking Dublin's twinkling skyline, he sat by the window with his guitar. The confetti from the show was still tangled in his hair. He picked out a few gentle chords, humming softly. His mother lay asleep on the bed, exhausted but smiling even in her dreams. Outside, the city was quiet, but somewhere below, a lone street musician played an old tune on his saxophone. Can't help falling in love. Marco closed his eyes, tears welling again. Papa, he whispered, they heard me. He imagined his father standing at the pier in Cavite, guitar in hand, smiling at the boy who had once dreamed to sing beyond the sea. In his mind, the two of them sang together once more, their voices meeting across time, across oceans. Like a river flows, surely to the sea. The next morning, Marco woke up to the world talking about him. Overnight the video of his performance had gone viral again, this time across every continent. Headlines read, Filipino boy's Elvis tribute brings Simon Cowell to tears. Golden buzzer moment that restored everyone's faith in humanity. A voice from the Philippines that touched the world. Celebrities tweeted about him. Elvis tribute artists in Memphis called him the reincarnation of soul. Even music teachers in Nashville used his audition video to remind their students that emotion matters more than perfection. Marco's small coastal town in Cavite lit up with pride. Children ran around the street shouting,
That's Kuya Marco!
He's on TV. Fishermen gathered around their radios to replay the broadcast. And the local mayor promised to build a small music school in Marco's name, so no other child with talent would have to sing only to the sea. Weeks later, Marco stood again on that same Dublin stage, this time for the finals. But before he sang, he looked into the camera and said, This one is for my papa, and for every kid who's ever dreamed from a small place. He sang, If I Can Dream, a song Elvis once used to inspire a nation. And as he hit the final note, his voice soared, trembling with hope, faith and love. When the music stopped, there was no sound for a few seconds. Then, one by one, people stood, not clapping immediately, but crying. Because everyone felt what he meant. Dreams may start in the smallest corners of the earth, but they can echo through the whole world. After the competition, Marco didn't just go home with fame, he went home with purpose. He used part of his prize money to help rebuild the old fishing pier, turning it into a small open-air stage where children could perform every weekend. He called it, the Dreamer's Pier. On its wooden railings, he carved a line that said, You don't need a big stage to have a big dream. He often sang there again, barefoot, just like before. Only now, the world listened, and every time he sang, Can't Help Falling in Love, he'd smile at the sky as though someone above was harmonizing with him. Months later, Marco returned to Dublin, not as a contestant, but as a guest performer on Ireland's Got Talent. As he walked out, the audience roared again. Simon Cowell stood to greet him, this time with a genuine smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon said, this boy reminded us that music has no borders, only bridges. Marco strummed his guitar, looked up at the lights, and began to sing, not for fame, not for glory, but for connection. His voice carried a message that transcended every language and every distance. Wherever you are, whoever you are, your dream matters. And somewhere in the crowd, a young Irish boy watched, eyes wide, clutching his small toy guitar. When the show ended, he turned to his father and said, Dad, maybe I can sing too. The man smiled. If that boy from the Philippines can, then you can too. And that was Marco's greatest victory, not the trophy, not the fame, but the spark he left behind in millions of hearts across the world. Because sometimes, it takes just one boy, one song and one act of courage to remind the world what it means to dream again.